Close your eyes and imagine a world where empires rise and fall over a simple taste on your tongue. Where men cross oceans, enslave millions, and reshape entire continents, all for tiny white crystals that dissolve on contact. Tonight, you're about to discover how something as innocent as sweetness became humanity's most dangerous addiction, a force so powerful it literally rewrote the course of human civilization. This is the story of sugar, and I promise you, by the end of this journey, you'll never look at that bowl on your breakfast table the same way again. The year is 8000 BCE, and somewhere in the lush river valleys of New Guinea, a quiet revolution is beginning. Picture this scene clearly in your mind as you settle deeper into comfort. A woman walks through tall grasses that tower over her head, their stalks thick as a man's wrist. The tropical sun beats down mercilessly, but she's searching for something specific. Her ancestors have been doing this for generations, seeking out these particular plants that grow wild along the riverbanks. She breaks off a piece of stalk and places it between her teeth, crushing the fibrous material. And then, for just a moment, her eyes close in pure pleasure as an unfamiliar sweetness floods her mouth. This is sugarcane, though she has no name for it yet. Saccharum officinarum, if we're being scientific about it. But there's nothing scientific about this moment. It's pure instinct, pure desire. The human tongue has evolved to crave sweetness because in nature, sweet usually means safe, usually means energy, usually means survival. What this woman doesn't know, what she cannot possibly know as she chews that fibrous stalk, is that she's tasting the substance that will one day fuel the slave trade, topple kingdoms, spark revolutions, and kill more people than most wars combined. Let that sink in as you breathe slowly, deeply. We're talking about sugar. Plain old sugar. For thousands of years, sugarcane remains a closely guarded secret of the South Pacific. It spreads slowly, carried by migrating peoples across the islands, each generation discovering that if you chew these stalks, you get that incredible burst of sweetness. But it's still just a plant, right? Just something you chew on when you're walking through the fields. Nothing world-changing about that. Nothing worth dying for. Except everything is about to change. Around 350 CE, something remarkable happens in the Gupta Empire of ancient India. Picture a hot workshop, flames roaring from a furnace, and a merchant named Buddhapada experimenting with crushed sugarcane juice. He's discovered that if you boil the juice down, it forms a thick syrup. And if you keep boiling, keep concentrating, something magical occurs. The syrup crystallizes. It becomes solid. It becomes portable. It becomes, for the first time in human history, a commodity that can travel. This is the moment everything shifts. Because chewing a stalk of sugarcane, that's limited to wherever sugarcane grows. But crystals can go anywhere. Crystals can be traded. Crystals can make you rich. The Indians called it sarkara, from the Sanskrit word meaning gravel or grit. Listen to how that sounds, sarkara, sugar. You can hear the connection, can't you? But more importantly, you can hear opportunity. The kind of opportunity that makes merchants salivate and kings take notice. Word of this incredible new substance spreads like wildfire. Arab traders, always with their ears to the ground for the next big thing, get wind of these sweet crystals. They taste it and their eyes go wide. This isn't just sweet, it's portable sweetness. It's concentrated pleasure. It's everything honey is, but it doesn't require bees, doesn't crystallize the same way, and doesn't spoil as easily. This is revolutionary. By 600 CE, Arab merchants are cultivating sugarcane throughout the Middle East. They're refining the crystallization process, building what they call sugar mills, and getting seriously, stupidly rich in the process. The Persian physician Shapur ibn Sahl writes extensive notes about sugar's medicinal properties. Medieval era physicians prescribe it for everything from digestive issues to depression. And here's where it gets interesting, here's where you can see the addiction taking root in human civilization, they start adding it to everything. Their cuisine transforms. Desserts become more elaborate. The wealthy start demanding sugar in their coffee, their teas, their foods. Sound familiar? Yeah, we'll get to that. But here's the thing about revolutionary commodities, here's the pattern that's going to repeat over and over in this story. Whoever controls the supply controls the wealth. And whoever controls the wealth controls power. The Arabs understand this instinctively. They guard their sugar-making techniques like state secrets. They control the trade routes. They become the gatekeepers of sweetness, and let me tell you, that's a pretty good gig if you can get it. Then, in 1096, everything goes absolutely bonkers. The Crusades begin, and thousands of European knights pour into the Holy Land. Now, these guys are expecting to find heathens and warfare and glory and all that medieval knight nonsense. What they're not expecting is to discover a taste that will literally change their entire civilization. Imagine a Norman knight, covered in dust and blood and probably smelling like a wet horse, taking his first bite of a sugar-coated pastry in a Damascus market. His entire world just shifted on its axis and he doesn't even know it yet. The Crusaders go absolutely nuts for sugar. They've got honey back home, sure, but this is different. This is refined. This is pure. This is the good stuff. When they return to Europe, they bring sugar with them, and suddenly every nobleman in Christendom wants in on this action. But there's a problem, sugar only grows in hot climates, and Europe is, well, not exactly tropical. So what do? They start looking for places to grow it. Sicily becomes an early sugar producer. The Spanish start cultivating it in Andalusia. But the real game changer comes in 1402 when Spanish conquistadors land in the Canary Islands. The climate is perfect. The land is fertile. And most importantly, there are people there who can be forced to work the fields. This is where the story gets dark, friends. Real dark. So settle in, because we're about to trace the line from innocent sweetness to one of humanity's greatest horrors. Before we go deeper into that darkness though, I want you to do me a favor. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I am telling it, go ahead and subscribe to Dreamless Timelines. We dive deep into history's most incredible stories, the ones that keep you riveted even as you drift off to sleep. Hit that like button too, because it helps more people discover these stories. And drop a comment telling me what historical topic you want us to explore next. Seriously, I read every single one. Now, where were we? Ah yes, the Canary Islands and the birth of an industry that would consume millions of lives. The thing about sugar is that it's brutally labor-intensive. You have to plant the cane. You have to tend it for months. You have to harvest it at exactly the right time, because if you wait too long, the sugar content drops. And then comes the really brutal part, you have to process it immediately. Like, within 24 hours immediately. Because once you cut sugarcane, it starts to spoil. The sugar content begins to degrade. So you've got this incredibly narrow window where you have to crush tons of cane, extract the juice, boil it down, crystallize it, and refine it. It's backbreaking work. It's dangerous work. The boiling houses are hot as hell, literally. Workers are handling boiling syrup that can strip the skin off your bones. The crushing mills can catch a hand and pull in an entire arm before you can blink. And the plantation owners need this work done fast, efficiently, and constantly. Free labor. That's expensive. Workers who can quit. That's unreliable. The plantation owners want a workforce they can control absolutely. A workforce they can work to death and simply replace. Enter the Atlantic slave trade. Now, Slavery existed before sugar. Let's be clear about that. But sugar transformed it from a relatively small-scale practice into an industrial machine of human suffering. In 1444, the Portuguese bring the first enslaved Africans to work the sugar plantations of the Atlantic Islands. It's a test run, really. Can this work? Can we build an entire industry on enslaved labor? The answer, horrifically, is yes. Very, very yes. By 1452, Pope Nicholas V issues the Dum de Verses, essentially giving Portugal the blessing of the Catholic Church to enslave non-Christians in perpetuity. Think about that for a second. The Pope, the supposed moral authority of Western civilization, officially sanctioning eternal slavery. Also, European nobles can have something sweet in their tea. The Portuguese perfect the system in São Tomé, an island off the coast of Africa. They build massive plantations, import thousands of enslaved Africans, and create what historians now call the prototype for the plantation system that will dominate the Americas. It's efficient. It's profitable. It's monstrous. And it works. Then, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sets sail and accidentally runs into the Americas. And if you think sugar's story was dark before, you ain't seen nothing yet. Columbus brings sugarcane cuttings with him on his second voyage in 1493. The Caribbean climate is absolutely perfect for sugar. Better than anywhere in the Old World. The soil is rich. The growing season is long. The islands are, in the twisted logic of colonizers, empty of European claims. It's like they've discovered paradise for sugar cultivation. There's just one problem: the indigenous people of the Caribbean, the Taino and other native populations, start dying in absolutely catastrophic numbers. European diseases tear through populations that have no immunity. Smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, these aren't just diseases, they're extinction events. Within a few decades, the native population of Hispaniola drops from potentially 1 million people to maybe a few thousand. The Spanish try to force the survivors to work the sugar plantations, but they're dying too fast. Plus, the Spanish crown is at least nominally concerned about the legality of enslaving people in their own lands. It's a thin moral distinction, but it's there. So what do? They start importing enslaved Africans on a scale that makes the earlier trade look like a warm-up act. The numbers are hard to wrap your head around. Between 1500 and 1866, approximately 12.5 million enslaved Africans are forced across the Atlantic. 12.5 million. And of those, roughly 40%, nearly 5 million people, go to work in sugar plantations. Not cotton. Not tobacco. Sugar. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like on the ground. It's 1650, and you're standing on a sugar plantation in Barbados. The island has transformed in just a few decades from a struggling tobacco colony to the richest piece of real estate in the British Empire. All because of sugar. The plantation stretches as far as you can see. Endless rows of sugarcane, each stalk growing 10, 12, sometimes 15 feet tall. The fields are worked by hundreds of enslaved people. Men, women, children. They're up before dawn, cutting cane with machetes. It's brutal work. The leaves have edges like glass that slice your skin. The sun is merciless. The pace is relentless because remember, once that cane is cut, you've got 24 hours. As the day wears on, you can hear the crushing mill. It's powered by wind or water or sometimes by cattle walking in endless circles, and it crushes the cane between massive rollers. The juice runs out into collection troughs, and that's when the really dangerous work begins. The boiling house is a vision of hell. Massive copper kettles filled with bubbling cane juice, heated by furnaces that turn the whole building into an oven. Enslaved workers stir the kettles with long paddles, skimming off impurities, ladling the thickening syrup from one kettle to the next as it concentrates. The heat is unbearable. The steam clouds your vision. One slip, one stumble, and you're in the kettle. It happens more often than plantation wreckers like to admit. And even if you don't fall in, the work is killing you slowly. The average life expectancy of an enslaved person on a Caribbean sugar plantation is 7 years from the time they arrive. 7 years. Most plantation owners consider this an acceptable loss rate because slaves are cheaper than paying free workers. Think about that economic calculation as you breathe slowly, as you let the horror of it settle into your consciousness. Human beings reduced to a spreadsheet entry, a cost-benefit analysis. It's cheaper to work people to death and buy new ones than to treat them humanely. The plantation owner lives in a grand house, probably importing furniture from Europe, wearing the latest fashions, drinking the finest wines. He's getting obscenely wealthy. A successful plantation can produce hundreds of tons of sugar a year, and back in Europe, sugar is still expensive enough that only the wealthy can afford it in quantity. This man is literally building his fortune on broken bodies and shortened lives. And here's the kicker, here's the part that should keep you up at night, except that we're here to help you sleep, so we'll process it together. Everybody knows. This isn't a secret. Travel writers visit these plantations and write about the horrors they see. Religious leaders occasionally raise concerns. But the sugar keeps flowing, and the money keeps rolling in, and somehow the collective conscience of European civilization finds a way to justify it. Because people back in London and Paris and Amsterdam really want their sugar. By 1700, sugar has gone from a luxury item to something approaching a necessity for the European middle class. The British, in particular, are going absolutely bananas for it. They're putting it in their tea, which they're drinking in massive quantities because they're also hooked on that from their colonies in India. They're making candies and preserves and pastries. Sugar consumption in Britain goes from basically zero in 1650 to 4 pounds per person per year by 1700, to 18 pounds per person by 1800. 18 pounds might not sound like much to our modern ears, but remember, this is refined sugar, it's still relatively expensive, and it represents a complete transformation in diet and culture. The British working class is literally consuming slavery. Every cup of tea, every sweet biscuit, every spoonful of jam is connected by an unbroken chain to those plantations in the Caribbean, to those boiling houses, to those brutally shortened lives. And the really twisted part? Sugar is being marketed as a health food. Seriously. Medical texts from the 1600s and 1700s promote sugar as beneficial for everything from strengthening the heart to improving digestion to enhancing mental clarity. It's considered a medicine as much as a food. Rich people give their children sugar regularly because they believe it's good for them. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife, but we'll get to sugar's actual health effects later. For now, we're still in the age of enlightenment, and Europe is building its wealth on a foundation of sweetened horror. But something's brewing, both literally and figuratively. Because while the sugar trade is making people rich, it's also creating tensions that are about to reshape the world. France controls Haiti, which they call Saint-Domingue, and it's the single most productive sugar colony in history. By 1791, this one island is producing more sugar than all of the British Caribbean colonies combined. It's making French plantation owners staggeringly wealthy. But it's also a powder keg, because to produce that much sugar, the French have imported enslaved Africans in truly staggering numbers. By 1791, there are about 500,000 enslaved people in Haiti, compared to about 32,000 European colonists and 24,000 free people of color. Do the math on that. The enslaved population outnumbers the free population by almost 10 to 1. And these aren't people who are being treated with even the minimal humanity of other slave societies. Haitian plantation owners are notorious for working enslaved people to death and simply importing more. The death rate is so high that the enslaved population can only be maintained through constant importation of new people from Africa. Then, in August 1791, everything explodes. The Haitian Revolution begins with a voodoo ceremony in the forest of Bois Cayman. Enslaved people from plantations across the northern part of the island gather in secret. They make sacrifices. They swear oaths. They plan rebellion. And then they light the night on fire. Within weeks, hundreds of plantations are burning. Enslaved people are rising up across the colony, killing their masters, destroying the sugar works, tearing down the entire system that has oppressed them. The violence is brutal, yeah, but let's keep some perspective here. This is a population that has been subjected to unimaginable cruelty fighting for their freedom against people who have consistently demonstrated they view them as less than human. The Haitian Revolution is going to last 13 years. It's going to involve battles against French, Spanish, and British forces. It's going to produce one of history's greatest military leaders in Toussaint Louverture, and later Jean-Jacques Dessalines. It's going to result in the first successful slave revolt in history, the establishment of the first Black Republic, and the absolute destruction of the world's most productive sugar economy. Napoleon Bonaparte, arguably the most powerful man in the world, is going to send an army of 40,000 soldiers to try to retake Haiti. They're going to fail. Between yellow fever, guerrilla warfare, and the sheer determination of people fighting for their freedom, the French are going to be defeated. In 1804, Haiti declares independence, and the shockwaves ripple across the entire Atlantic world. Enslaved people in other colonies hear about Haiti and hope sparks in their hearts. Plantation owners across the Caribbean and the American South hear about Haiti and fear grips their souls. The impossible has happened. The system can be broken. Freedom can be won. But here's where the story gets even more complex, because while Haiti's revolution is the most dramatic response to the sugar economy, it's not the only resistance happening. Across the Caribbean and the American South, enslaved people are constantly resisting in ways big and small. They're running away, slowing down work, breaking tools, poisoning masters, staging smaller rebellions. The entire system is maintained only through constant, brutal violence. And back in Europe, something interesting is starting to happen. A moral reckoning is beginning. It starts small, with Quaker activists in England and America who oppose slavery on religious grounds. But it grows. Writers like Olaudah Equiano, himself a formerly enslaved man, publish accounts of their experiences that shock European readers. Political activists begin campaigning for abolition. In 1787, the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade is founded in London. They're organized, they're passionate, and they're going up against the most profitable industry in the British Empire. The pro-slavery forces fight back hard. West Indian planters and their allies argue that the British economy will collapse without slave-produced sugar. They claim enslaved people are happy, that slavery is a civilizing force, that immediate abolition would cause chaos. They spend massive amounts of money on propaganda and political lobbying. But the abolitionists have something powerful on their side, they have the truth. They publish accounts of the Middle Passage, of plantation life, of the brutality of the system. They organize boycotts of slave-produced sugar. British consumers, particularly women who control household purchasing decisions, start buying only sugar certified as produced by free labor, even though it costs more. Think about that for a second. Regular people, middle-class families, making purchasing decisions based on moral principles, even when it costs them money. It's one of the first major consumer boycott movements in history, and it's centered on sugar. In 1807, Britain abolishes the slave trade. Not slavery itself yet, but the trade. No more ships loaded with human cargo crossing the Atlantic. It's a huge victory, but it's also incomplete. Enslaved people in British colonies are still enslaved. They're still producing sugar. They're still suffering. The campaign continues. Activists like William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and Olaudah Equiano keep pushing. Formerly enslaved people like Mary Prince published their narratives, putting human faces on the abstract horror. The pressure builds and builds and builds. Finally, in 1833, Britain passes the Slavery Abolition Act. Slavery is illegal throughout the British Empire as of 1834. It's a triumph of moral campaigning, of human rights, of basic decency. But here's the thing that should make your blood boil: the British government pays compensation. £20 million, which is about $17 billion in today's money. That's one of the largest government expenditures in British history to that point. British taxpayers are paying off this debt until 2015. Yeah, you read that right. 2015. But here's the kicker: the compensation doesn't go to the enslaved people. It goes to the slave owners for the loss of their property. The people who have suffered, who have had their lives stolen, who have been worked to death in sugar fields and boiling houses. They get nothing. Not a penny. Not an acre of land. Not an apology. Meanwhile, many formerly enslaved people in the Caribbean end up working the same sugar plantations under new systems of indentured servitude that are barely better than slavery. The plantation owners, flush with compensation money, now have to pay wages, but they control the land, they control the stores, they control the housing. It's exploitation with a different name. And the sugar keeps flowing. The addiction doesn't stop just because the production method changes. But let's shift our focus for a minute, because while all this is happening in the Caribbean, something very different is going on in North America, and it's going to change the sugar story in ways nobody expects. The United States is a growing power, and Americans have developed quite a taste for sweetness. But here's the problem: most sugar is still being produced in the Caribbean, and most of those Caribbean islands are controlled by European powers. After the revolution, Americans are less than thrilled about being dependent on British or French sugar. Plus, there's this whole issue of slavery. The northern states are gradually abolishing it, while the southern states are doubling down on it for cotton production. Sugar is part of this complicated dance, because sugar produced by enslaved people is cheap, and Americans like cheap. Then, in 1747, a German chemist named Andreas Marggraf discovers something interesting: you can extract sugar from beets. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal at first. The process is expensive, the yield is low, and honestly, Caribbean cane sugar is easier and cheaper. But then Napoleon happens. Napoleon is constantly at war with Britain, and one of Britain's major weapons is its navy, which controls the seas and enforces blockades. This means French access to Caribbean sugar is unreliable at best. Napoleon needs a domestic source of sugar, and beet sugar suddenly looks a lot more attractive. He offers incentives for beet cultivation and sugar production. French scientists refine the extraction process. By 1810, France has a budding beet sugar industry. It's still more expensive than cane sugar, but it has one massive advantage: you can grow sugar beets in temperate climates. Like, Europe. After Napoleon falls, the beet sugar industry takes off across Europe. Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, they all start cultivating sugar beets. By 1880, beet sugar accounts for more than half of the world's sugar production. The Caribbean plantation economy, which has dominated global sugar production for 3 centuries, is suddenly facing serious competition. This has interesting effects. For one thing, it drives down the price of sugar. Remember how sugar used to be a luxury item? By the late 1800s, it's becoming cheap enough for working-class families to afford it regularly. British sugar consumption, which was 18 pounds per person per year in 1800, hits 90 pounds per person by 1900. Let that sink in. 90 pounds of sugar per person per year. That's not just putting a spoonful in your tea. That's sugar in everything. Industrial food production is taking off, and sugar is a key ingredient. Canned goods, baked goods, candies, desserts, drinks, sugar is everywhere. And this is where we need to talk about what sugar is actually doing to the human body, because this is where the sweet poison part of our story really kicks in. Here's the thing, humans evolved to crave sweetness because in nature, sweet foods are usually fruits, and fruits provide quick energy in the form of natural sugars plus fiber, vitamins, and other nutrients. Our bodies are designed to handle natural sweetness in moderation. But refined sugar? That's something entirely different. When you eat an apple, you're getting sugar, yeah, but you're also getting fiber that slows down absorption, nutrients that your body needs, and you're getting full from the bulk of the fruit. You can maybe eat 2 or 3 apples before you feel satisfied. But refined sugar? You can consume massive amounts without feeling full because it's just pure energy with no fiber, no nutrients, nothing to trigger your satiety response. A can of Coke has about 10 teaspoons of sugar. Try eating 10 teaspoons of sugar straight and your body would rebel. But dissolved in a fizzy drink? No problem. Your body processes this sugar by flooding your bloodstream with insulin, which shuttles the glucose into your cells. But when you're constantly consuming sugar, your cells start to become resistant to insulin. Your pancreas has to produce more and more insulin to get the same effect. Eventually, this can lead to type 2 diabetes. But that's just the beginning. Excess sugar gets converted to fat, particularly visceral fat around your organs. This leads to obesity, which leads to a whole cascade of health problems, heart disease, stroke, certain cancers, joint problems, sleep apnea, the list goes on. And here's the really insidious part, sugar is addictive. Like, actually addictive. Brain imaging studies show that sugar activates the same reward pathways as cocaine. It triggers dopamine release, which feels good, which makes you want more. Your body builds up tolerance, so you need more sugar to get the same pleasure response. If you try to quit, you can experience withdrawal symptoms, headaches, mood swings, cravings, irritability. We've created a substance that is cheap, ubiquitous, highly profitable, and literally addictive, and we've built an entire food industry around getting people hooked on it. But nobody knows this yet. We're still in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and sugar is being marketed as wholesome, as energizing, as pure. Mothers are encouraged to give their children sugar for energy and growth. Athletes are told to consume sugar for performance. It's in everything, and everyone thinks it's just fine. Meanwhile, the sugar industry is consolidating and becoming more powerful. Companies like Tate & Lyle in Britain, Domino Sugar in America, and others are building massive refineries, controlling distribution networks, and making incredible profits. They're also starting to lobby governments to protect their interests. In the United States, this leads to the development of a complex system of sugar tariffs and quotas that continues to this day. The government protects domestic sugar producers, both cane and beet, by limiting imports and keeping prices artificially high. This makes sugar companies rich while making American consumers pay more for sugar than they would on the free market. But Americans are consuming so much sugar that they don't really notice. By the 1920s, American sugar consumption is over 100 pounds per person per year. By the 1970s, it's approaching 120 pounds per person. And that's just refined sugar, not counting the high fructose corn syrup that's about to enter the picture. Oh yeah, we need to talk about high fructose corn syrup. Because just when you think the sugar story can't get more twisted, American agricultural policy and food science team up to create something even more insidious. In the 1970s, a few things happened simultaneously. First, the US government is subsidizing corn production heavily, which means farmers are producing way more corn than the market can absorb. Second, Japanese researchers figure out how to efficiently convert corn starch into high-fructose corn syrup, a sweetener that's chemically similar to sugar but cheaper to produce. Third, sugar prices are high because of those tariffs and quotas we mentioned. The food industry looks at this situation and sees dollar signs. High-fructose corn syrup is cheaper than sugar, it's easier to transport, it's a liquid, it mixes easily into foods and drinks, and it's made from corn, which Americans are producing in massive surplus. It's a perfect solution to their profit margins. By the 1980s, high-fructose corn syrup is in everything. Soft drinks, bread, yogurt, salad dressings, ketchup, crackers, cereal. If it comes in a package, it probably has high-fructose corn syrup in it. Sometimes it's the second or third ingredient, meaning it's one of the main components. And here's where it gets really interesting from a health perspective. Some researchers believe that fructose, which is metabolized differently than glucose, is particularly harmful. Your liver processes fructose, and when you consume it in large amounts, it can lead to fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, and metabolic syndrome. There's debate about whether high-fructose corn syrup is worse than regular sugar, but the consensus is that they're both terrible when consumed in the quantities that Americans are consuming them. By 2000, Americans are consuming an average of 152 pounds of caloric sweeteners per person per year. That's combining sugar and high-fructose corn syrup. 152 pounds. That's about 300,000 calories from sweeteners alone, or about 800 calories per day. For reference, the average person needs about 2,000 calories total per day. The health effects are catastrophic. Obesity rates skyrocket. Type 2 diabetes, which used to be called adult-onset diabetes, starts appearing in children and gets renamed because it's no longer limited to adults. Heart disease remains the #1 killer in America. Certain cancers increase. Fatty liver disease, which used to be primarily associated with alcoholism, becomes common in people who barely drink alcohol but consume lots of sugar. But here's the thing, the sugar industry knows this is happening. They know their product is harmful. And they do exactly what the tobacco industry did. They fund research to create doubt, they lobby politicians to prevent regulation, they market aggressively to children, and they fight any attempt to educate the public about sugar's dangers. In the 1960s, the sugar industry secretly paid Harvard scientists to publish research downplaying the link between sugar and heart disease, instead blaming fat. This influences nutrition policy for decades. The low-fat diet craze of the 1980s and 1990s. That's partly the result of sugar industry propaganda. Food companies remove fat from products and replace it with sugar to make them taste good, then market them as healthy because they're low-fat. It's one of the most successful disinformation campaigns in history, and it's still affecting how people eat today. Documents that came to light in 2016 showed that in the 1960s, the Sugar Research Foundation paid 3 Harvard scientists about $50,000 in today's dollars to publish a review minimizing the link between sugar and heart health and shifting blame to saturated fat. This research was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, with no disclosure of the funding source. Think about that. The sugar industry paid scientists to lie, and those lies influenced nutrition guidelines, medical advice, and public health policy for 50 years. Millions of people made dietary choices based on corrupted science, choices that may have shortened their lives. And the thing is, this playbook was straight out of the tobacco industry's handbook. Create doubt about the science. Fund friendly researchers. Attack critics. Lobby politicians. Market to children. Claim that personal responsibility, not your product, is the issue. It worked for tobacco for decades. It's been working for sugar for even longer. But cracks are starting to appear in the facade. In the 2000s and 2010s, researchers start publishing studies that the sugar industry can't suppress. The links between sugar consumption and obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other health problems become too clear to ignore. Documentaries like Fed Up and books like Salt, Sugar, Fat start educating the public about what they're actually eating. Cities start considering soda taxes. Some countries implement them. Food labeling laws get stronger. The WHO recommends limiting added sugar to less than 10% of daily calories, ideally less than 5%. That's about 6 teaspoons of added sugar per day, or about 1 can of Coke. For context, the average American is consuming about 17 teaspoons of added sugar per day. Nearly 3 times the recommendation. The sugar industry fights back, of course. They lobby hard against soda taxes. They fund studies claiming sugar isn't the problem. They reformulate products slightly and market them as healthier. They create new sweeteners and blend them with sugar to reduce the total sugar content while maintaining sweetness. They're doing everything they can to protect their profits. Because here's the thing, the global sugar industry is worth over $50 billion a year. That's a lot of money, a lot of jobs, a lot of political influence. The industry isn't going to go down without a fight. And they have allies. Corn growers who produce high-fructose corn syrup. Food manufacturers who rely on sugar to make their products palatable. Advertising agencies who make money from sugar companies. Politicians who receive campaign contributions from all of the above. It's a system, a massive interconnected system of economic interests, all centered around a substance that is literally killing people. But let's zoom out for a minute. Let's look at the big picture of what sugar has done to human history. Sugar transformed global trade patterns, creating the first truly global commodity market. It drove the age of exploration as European powers searched for suitable lands to grow sugarcane. It funded the development of navigation technology, shipbuilding, and eventually the Industrial Revolution, as sugar profits were invested in new technologies and industries. Sugar was the primary driver of the Atlantic slave trade, which forcibly moved millions of Africans across the ocean and fundamentally shaped the demographics, cultures, and economies of the Americas. The effects of this are still visible today in everything from political divisions to wealth inequality to systemic racism. Sugar sparked revolutions. Haiti's revolution, which we discussed earlier, terrified slave owners across the Americas and inspired enslaved people everywhere. It proved that the system could be overthrown, that freedom could be won through struggle. Sugar shaped modern capitalism. The plantation system was one of the first examples of industrial agriculture, with its focus on monoculture, economies of scale, division of labor, and profit maximization. The ways that sugar plantations were organized and financed influenced how other industries would develop. Sugar changed human diets and culture. The way we eat today, with sweetness expected in everything from bread to salad dressing, is a direct result of the sugar industry's influence over the past few centuries. Before sugar became cheap and abundant, most people's diets were savory, with sweetness coming occasionally from fruits or honey. Now, sweetness is the default. Sugar-fueled imperialism. The desire to control sugar-producing regions drove European powers to conquer and colonize vast territories. The British Empire, the French colonial system, the Spanish conquests, all were deeply intertwined with sugar economics. The phrase, white gold, wasn't just marketing, it was an accurate description of sugar's value to imperial powers. And sugar continues to shape geopolitics today. Trade agreements, agricultural subsidies, development aid, sugar is still a factor. Countries like Brazil, India, and Thailand are major sugar producers and exporters. Their economic policies, their environmental practices, their labor laws, all are influenced by sugar. Speaking of environment, we need to talk about what sugar cultivation has done to the planet, because this is another layer of the story that often gets overlooked. Sugarcane is a thirsty crop. It requires massive amounts of water, which has led to the depletion of aquifers and the diversion of rivers in sugar-producing regions. In Brazil, which is now the world's largest sugar producer, sugarcane cultivation has contributed to deforestation of the Atlantic forest and the Cerrado savanna. Sugar beet production in Europe and North America isn't much better. It requires heavy fertilizer use, which leads to nutrient runoff that pollutes waterways and creates dead zones in coastal areas. The pesticides used in sugar production contaminate soil and water. And then there's the processing. Sugar refineries consume enormous amounts of energy and water. They produce waste products that need to be disposed of. In many sugar-producing regions, the waste from sugar mills pollutes rivers and soil. But perhaps the most visible environmental impact is the burning. In many regions, sugarcane fields are burned before harvest to remove the leaves and make cutting easier. This releases massive amounts of carbon dioxide and particulate matter into the atmosphere. In places like India and Brazil, the smoke from burning sugarcane fields creates air quality problems for millions of people. It's another hidden cost of sugar, one that we're all paying whether we consume sugar or not. Now, before we go further, I want to take a moment to acknowledge those of you still listening. If you're still with me, still absorbing this story as you drift towards sleep, you're exactly the kind of curious, thoughtful person we create content for at Dreamless Timelines. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's most fascinating stories. And if you're enjoying this, hit that like button and leave a comment about what topic you'd like us to explore next. Your engagement really does help us create more content like this. Let's shift gears and talk about something that might surprise you: how sugar has influenced science and medicine, both positively and negatively. On the positive side, sugar has been crucial to many scientific advances. The study of sugar chemistry helped develop organic chemistry as a discipline. Understanding how the body metabolizes sugar was key to understanding metabolism in general. Research into diabetes has led to insights about hormone function, cell signaling, and countless other biological processes. The insulin story alone is fascinating. In 1921, Frederick Banting and Charles Best isolated insulin in a laboratory in Toronto. They tested it on diabetic dogs first, then on a dying 14-year-old boy named Leonard Thompson. The results were miraculous. Before insulin, a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes was a death sentence, usually within a year or two. After insulin, it became a manageable chronic condition. Banting and Best could have made billions by patenting insulin and controlling its production. Instead, they sold the patent to the University of Toronto for $1, believing that something so important should be available to everyone who needed it. That's a beautiful moment in medical history, a genuine triumph of science and human compassion. But here's where it gets complicated: the availability of insulin has allowed the sugar industry to continue operating with fewer consequences. People with diabetes can manage their condition with insulin, which means they can continue consuming sugar-laden diets. The medical solution has, in a weird way, enabled the continuation of the dietary problem. And insulin, which Banting and Best wanted to be universally available, has become incredibly expensive in the United States due to pharmaceutical company greed. People are dying because they can't afford their insulin. It's a perversion of Banting and Best's vision, and it's directly connected to the sugar-driven diabetes epidemic. The story gets even more tangled when you look at how sugar companies have influenced medical research. We've already talked about the Harvard scientists they paid in the 1960s, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Throughout the 20th century, sugar industry groups funded research, often with strings attached. They'd fund studies designed to show sugar in a favorable light. If studies showed negative results, they wouldn't be published. Researchers who wanted continued funding knew better than to bite the hand that fed them. This has created a situation where the scientific literature on sugar is contaminated with industry-influenced research. Meta-analyses, which combine results from multiple studies, can be skewed by the inclusion of biased studies. This makes it harder for honest researchers to determine the truth, and it makes it easier for the sugar industry to claim that the science is unclear or controversial. It's the same playbook tobacco used. Create doubt. Manufacture controversy. Delay regulation. But science, real science, has a way of getting at the truth eventually. By the 2010s, the evidence linking sugar to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other health problems is overwhelming. The mechanisms are understood. The dose-response relationships are clear. The epidemiological data is consistent across populations and time periods. We know sugar is harmful. We know how much is too much. We know it's addictive. We know the industry has lied about all of this for decades. And yet, consumption remains high. Why? Because knowing something intellectually and changing your behavior are two very different things. Let's talk about sugar addiction more deeply, because this is key to understanding why the story doesn't end with scientific knowledge. Your brain is wired to seek out sugar. In evolutionary terms, this made sense. Sweet foods in nature are usually safe to eat and provide quick energy. A human who craved sweetness and sought it out would have a survival advantage over one who didn't. But your brain evolved in an environment where sweet foods were rare. A few berries here, some honey there, maybe some sweet roots or fruits when in season. Your brain's reward system is calibrated for occasional sweetness, not constant availability. When you eat sugar, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in cocaine and heroin addiction. Dopamine makes you feel good. It creates a reward association. Your brain learns, sugar equals pleasure equals do that again. With repeated exposure, your brain adapts. Dopamine receptors downregulate, meaning you need more sugar to get the same pleasure response. This is tolerance, the same phenomenon that happens with drug addiction. And when you try to cut back, withdrawal, headaches, fatigue, irritability, intense cravings, difficulty concentrating, mood swings, anxiety. These are real physiological symptoms, not just lacking willpower. The food industry knows this. They employ food scientists whose job is to find the bliss point for sugar in products, the exact amount that maximizes pleasure and consumption. They test different formulations on focus groups. They use brain imaging to see which versions activate reward centers most strongly. This isn't accidental. It's engineered addiction. And it starts young. Baby food with added sugar. Sweetened cereals marketed to children with cartoon characters and toy prizes. Juice boxes with as much sugar as soda but marketed as healthy. School lunches with chocolate milk and cookies. Vending machines in schools. Fast food restaurants with playgrounds and kids' meals with toys. The industry is literally hooking children, creating customers for life. And it's working. Childhood obesity has tripled since the 1970s. Type 2 diabetes in children has increased over 1,000%. We're raising the first generation in human history expected to have a shorter lifespan than their parents, and sugar is a major reason why. But let's be fair here, it's not just evil corporations forcing sugar down our throats. There are real psychological and social factors at play. Sugar is comfort. Think about the role sweets play in your life. Birthday cake. Holiday cookies. Ice cream after a breakup. Candy at the movies. Chocolate when you're stressed. We've built an entire emotional architecture around sugar. It's how we celebrate, how we comfort, how we show love. Your grandmother's cookies aren't just food, they're love made tangible. The cake at your wedding isn't just dessert, it's a symbol of sweetness and celebration. These associations are deep, they're cultural, they're personal. And in a world that's often difficult, stressful, and uncertain, sugar provides reliable pleasure. It's cheap, it's legal, it's socially acceptable, and it works. That dopamine hit is real. For a few minutes, eating something sweet actually does make you feel better. This is why just telling people, sugar is bad, stop eating it, doesn't work. You're asking them to give up something that's deeply embedded in their culture, their psychology, their daily rituals of comfort and pleasure. That's a big ask. Plus, sugar is everywhere. Even if you wanted to avoid it, you'd struggle. It's in bread, pasta sauce, salad dressing, soup, crackers, yogurt, cereal, granola bars, protein bars, sports drinks, vitamin water, fruit juice, ketchup, barbecue sauce, teriyaki sauce. The list is endless. Food manufacturers add sugar to everything because it makes food taste better, it's cheap, it increases shelf life, and it keeps customers coming back. Reading labels is like a full-time job, and even then, sugar hides under dozens of different names: sucrose, glucose, fructose, maltose, dextrose, lactose, high fructose corn syrup, maple syrup, agave nectar, honey, molasses, fruit juice concentrate, and on and on. The average American eats at restaurants or gets takeout multiple times per week, and in those situations, you have essentially no control over sugar content. The pasta sauce at that Italian restaurant? Loaded with sugar. The teriyaki chicken? Sugar. The smoothie that seems healthy? Often more sugar than a milkshake. So even people who are trying to reduce sugar consumption face enormous obstacles. It requires constant vigilance, extensive label reading, cooking most meals from scratch, and resisting social pressure in situations where everyone else is eating sweet foods. It's exhausting. And for many people, it feels impossible. This brings us to an important question: what's the solution? How do we deal with sugar as a society? There are basically a few approaches, and they're all controversial in different ways. First, you've got the personal responsibility approach. This is the sugar industry's favorite argument: we provide a product, consumers make choices, if people eat too much sugar that's their fault, not ours. Just like alcohol or gambling or anything else, moderation is key, and individuals need to exercise self-control. There's some truth to this. Adults do make choices. But this argument ignores the addictive nature of sugar, the way it's engineered to be overconsumed, the fact that it's marketed heavily to children who can't make informed choices, and the reality that when you make a harmful product ubiquitous and cheap, consumption will increase regardless of individual willpower. Second, you've got the education approach. Teach people about nutrition, about sugar content in foods, about health risks. Help them make informed choices. This is better than nothing, but decades of nutrition education have done little to slow the obesity and diabetes epidemics. Knowledge alone isn't enough when you're fighting against addiction, omnipresent marketing, cultural norms, and engineered food. Third, you've got the regulation approach. This is where it gets really controversial. Sugar taxes, like those implemented in Mexico, some US cities, and various other countries. Restrictions on marketing to children. Mandatory warning labels. Limits on sugar content in certain products. Removal of sugary drinks from schools and government buildings. These measures work. Mexico's soda tax led to a measurable decrease in consumption, particularly among lower-income families. Warning labels change behavior. Marketing restrictions reduce demand among children. But opponents argue this is government overreach, a nanny state, telling people what they can and can't eat. They say it's regressive, hurting poor people who spend a larger percentage of their income on food. They argue it won't work, people will just find other sources of sugar. The debate is heated, and it's not just about sugar. It's about freedom versus public health, individual rights versus collective welfare, capitalism versus regulation. These are fundamental political and philosophical questions. Personally, I think there's room for a multifaceted approach. Yes, individuals need to make better choices. Yes, education matters. But also yes, we need to regulate an industry that is profiting from addiction and actively working to keep people ignorant about their products' harms. We did this with tobacco. We didn't ban cigarettes, but we taxed them, restricted marketing, required warning labels, banned smoking in public places, and funded cessation programs. Smoking rates have dropped dramatically as a result. Why can't we do the same with sugar? But let's step back from policy debates and look at something more fundamental. What is our relationship with sweetness supposed to be? For most of human history, sweetness was rare and precious. Honey required braving bee stings. Fruit was seasonal. Sweet foods were treats, special occasions, moments of celebration. In that context, the human desire for sweetness made sense. It was adaptive. It pushed us to seek out calorie-dense foods when they were available because we never knew when we'd find them again. But we've created a world where every day is a celebration, where sweetness is available 24/7, where you can walk into any gas station at 3 a.m. and buy a gallon of soda and 5 candy bars for less than $10. We've turned a survival mechanism into a liability. Our Stone Age brains are colliding with modern food technology, and the results are devastating. So maybe the question isn't just, how do we regulate sugar, but how do we rebuild a healthy relationship with sweetness? This might mean relearning to appreciate subtle flavors. Rediscovering how sweet a strawberry tastes when you're not comparing it to candy. Finding pleasure in foods that don't spike your blood sugar and crash your energy. It might mean changing cultural traditions. Maybe birthday celebrations don't have to center on cake. Maybe holidays can be special without cookies and candy. Maybe we can show love through time and attention rather than baked goods. It definitely means breaking the association between emotion and sugar. Finding other ways to comfort ourselves when we're sad, other ways to celebrate when we're happy, other ways to cope with stress and boredom and loneliness. This is hard work. It's psychological, it's cultural, it's deeply personal. But it's also necessary if we want to escape the trap that sugar has become. Now, let's talk about something that might give you hope: the rise of the anti-sugar movement. In the past decade, there's been a growing awareness of sugar's harms and a corresponding cultural shift. Books like The Case Against Sugar, by Gary Taubes, and Salt, Sugar, Fat, by Michael Moss become bestsellers. Documentaries expose the industry's practices. Celebrities and influencers promote low-sugar lifestyles. Food companies are responding, sometimes genuinely, sometimes cynically. You're seeing more products labeled "no added sugar" or "low sugar." Alternative sweeteners are everywhere: stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, allulose. Some of these alternatives are better than sugar. Stevia, for example, doesn't spike blood sugar and has no calories. But some are problematic in their own ways. Artificial sweeteners like aspartame and sucralose may have their own health issues, and they maintain the expectation of intense sweetness, which perpetuates the problem. And let's be real, the food industry is great at co-opting health movements and turning them into marketing opportunities. Low-sugar products that replace sugar with other problematic ingredients. Natural sweeteners that are just as bad as refined sugar. Products reformulated to have slightly less sugar but marketed as healthy. It's greenwashing, but for food. You have to read labels carefully and think critically about marketing claims. Still, the trend is encouraging. More people are aware of sugar's dangers. More people are trying to reduce consumption. There's a growing market for actually healthy foods, which encourages companies to produce them. And on the scientific front, research continues. We're learning more about how sugar affects different body systems, how different types of sugar are metabolized, how genetic factors influence sugar sensitivity, how the microbiome interacts with sugar consumption. This knowledge will lead to better interventions, better treatments for diabetes and obesity, better understanding of addiction and cravings. But knowledge without action is meaningless. We know enough right now to know that we need to change. The question is whether we have the collective will to do it. Let me take you back in time once more, because there's a part of this story we haven't fully explored: what happened to the places and people who produced sugar. The Caribbean islands that were transformed into sugar factories, what are they like today? Many are still struggling with the legacy of colonialism and the plantation economy. Economies that were built around sugar monoculture struggled when sugar prices fell and competition increased. Haiti, which we talked about earlier, never fully recovered from the revolution economically. France demanded reparations for the lost property, including enslaved people, and Haiti paid these debts until 1947, which crippled their economy. The land that was once productive sugar plantations was divided into small subsistence farms. Deforestation, soil erosion, and poverty have been persistent problems. Jamaica, Barbados, Cuba, each has its own post-sugar story, but many involve economic struggle, emigration, attempts to diversify into tourism or other industries, and persistent inequality that traces back to the plantation era. The descendants of enslaved Africans, who built the sugar economy with their labor and their lives, have not generally benefited from that wealth. The inequality is stark and ongoing. The trauma is intergenerational. And in the American South, where sugar was one of several plantation crops, the legacy of slavery has shaped everything from voting patterns to wealth distribution to incarceration rates to educational outcomes. The past isn't past. It's still here, still affecting people's lives. Meanwhile, the descendants of plantation owners and sugar merchants often retain their wealth and status. That £20 million that the British government paid to slave owners. That money went to families who then invested it in other industries, in land, in education for their children. Wealth compounds over generations. There are British aristocrats today whose fortunes trace directly back to sugar and slavery. There are American families whose wealth originated in sugar plantations. This isn't ancient history. This is money that's still around, still providing advantages. And in Brazil, which is now the world's largest sugar producer, the industry is still built on exploitation, though it looks different now. Migrant workers, often from poor regions, work in brutal conditions cutting sugarcane. They're paid by the ton, which encourages them to work beyond their physical limits. Heat stroke, exhaustion, and injuries are common. Some workers literally work themselves to death. It's not chattel slavery, but it's not freedom either. The industry has moved from one exploited population to another, always seeking the cheapest possible labor. In India, another major sugar producer, the situation is similar. Seasonal workers, often from marginalized castes, do the brutal work of cutting cane. Child labor is a persistent problem. Workers are sometimes trapped in debt bondage to plantation owners. The story keeps repeating. Sugar demands cheap labor. Cheap labor means exploitation. Exploitation creates suffering. Why? Because sugar has to be cheap. Consumers in wealthy countries expect cheap sugar. Food companies demand cheap sugar for their products. If sugar gets too expensive, people will complain, companies will lose money, governments will face political pressure. So the industry finds ways to keep costs down, and those ways always involve squeezing the workers at the bottom of the chain. It's the same story it's always been, just with different details. Now, I want to shift to something personal. If you're still listening, still following this journey through sugar's dark history, you might be wondering, what do I do with this information? How do I think about the sugar in my own life? That's a fair question, and I don't have easy answers. But I can share some thoughts. First, knowledge is power, but it's also a burden. Once you know what sugar does, once you understand its history, once you see the industry's manipulation, you can't unknow it. Every time you eat something sweet, there's going to be a little voice in your head reminding you of all this. That can feel overwhelming. But it can also be liberating, because knowledge gives you agency. You get to make informed choices rather than being unconsciously manipulated. Second, perfection isn't the goal. You don't have to eliminate sugar entirely from your life. You don't have to become some sort of anti-sugar crusader. Moderation is okay. Occasional treats are fine. The problem isn't having cake at your birthday party. The problem is consuming massive amounts of sugar daily without even realizing it. Third, small changes add up. Maybe you start by cutting out soda. Or reducing the sugar in your coffee. Or reading labels and avoiding products where sugar is one of the first 3 ingredients. Or cooking more meals at home where you control what goes in them. These aren't huge sacrifices, but they make a difference. They reduce your total sugar intake. They help reset your taste buds so you start to appreciate less sweet foods. They break some of the unconscious consumption patterns. Fourth, be kind to yourself. If you're addicted to sugar, that's not a moral failing. It's the result of biology meeting food engineering meeting ubiquitous availability. You're not weak. You're human. And breaking an addiction is hard, really hard. You'll have setbacks. That's okay. Progress isn't linear. Fifth, think about the system, not just yourself. Individual choices matter, but systemic change matters more. Support policies that reduce sugar in foods. Vote for politicians who will stand up to the food industry. Buy from companies that are actually trying to produce healthier food. Teach your kids about nutrition. Talk to your friends about this stuff. The sugar industry has power because we give it to them, collectively. If enough people demand change, change will happen. And finally, remember that this isn't just about health. It's about freedom. Real freedom isn't the freedom to buy whatever junk food corporations want to sell you. Real freedom is freedom from addiction, freedom from manipulation, freedom to make genuine choices about what you put in your body. Sugar has controlled humanity for centuries. It's shaped our history, built fortunes, destroyed lives, altered the planet. But it doesn't have to control your future. You have the power to change your relationship with sweetness. It won't be easy. The industry will fight to keep you hooked. Your own brain will resist change. But it's possible. And if enough people do it, if enough of us refuse to accept the status quo, we can change the whole system. That's the real revolution, the one that's still ongoing. Not overthrowing plantation owners or colonial powers, but overthrowing the idea that we need constant sweetness, that we should accept whatever the food industry wants to feed us, that this is just how things have to be. We deserve better. We deserve food that nourishes rather than harms. We deserve honesty rather than manipulation. We deserve freedom rather than addiction. And slowly, gradually, we're starting to demand it. Let me bring you back to where we started, to that woman in New Guinea 10,000 years ago, chewing on a piece of sugarcane. If she could see what became of her discovery, what would she think? Would she marvel at the global industry, the technological sophistication, the sheer scale of sugar production? Or would she be horrified at the suffering, the exploitation, the disease? Maybe both. Maybe she'd recognize that humans have a talent for taking something innocent and making it monstrous through sheer excess. Sugar itself isn't evil. It's a plant, a chemical compound, a source of energy. The evil is in what we've done with it, how we've structured our economy around it, how we've allowed it to dominate our food supply, how we've let profit override health and humanity. But here's the thing about history, it's not fixed. It's still being written. The sugar story isn't over. We're living in it right now, in this moment where awareness is growing, where change is possible, where the next chapter could go in a very different direction. We could continue down the current path, consuming ever more sugar, watching obesity and diabetes rates climb, accepting that this is just how things are. Or we could choose differently. We could demand better from our food system. We could rebuild our relationship with sweetness. We could create a future where sugar is a rare treat rather than a daily addiction, where our food nourishes us rather than slowly killing us. The choice is ours, individually and collectively. And that choice will become part of the historical record, part of the story that future generations will tell about us. What will they say? That we knew sugar was harmful but couldn't give it up? Or that we recognized the problem and had the courage to change? I don't know the answer. Nobody does. History hasn't happened yet. But I do know this: every journey begins with a single step. Every revolution starts with individuals deciding they've had enough. Every major social change was once considered impossible until suddenly it wasn't. The complete history of sugar is also the incomplete history of sugar. The final chapters are still being written. And you, right now, listening to this, you're part of that story. What role will you play? Think about that as you drift off to sleep. Think about the long arc of history, the millions of lives touched by sugar, the empires built and destroyed, the fortunes made and lost, the suffering endured and the pleasures enjoyed. Think about the complexity of it all, how something so simple and sweet could be so devastating and transformative. And then, in the morning, when you wake up, you get to make choices. Small choices maybe, but choices nonetheless. Choices that are part of the ongoing story of humanity's relationship with sweetness. What will you choose? Before you fully drift away, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to Dreamless Timelines if you haven't already. We pour our hearts into researching and crafting these long-form historical narratives specifically designed to give you fascinating content as you fall asleep. Every subscription helps us create more of these deep dives into history's most compelling stories. And please, hit that like button and leave a comment telling us what historical topic you'd like us to explore next. Your engagement genuinely shapes what we create, and we love hearing from you. Now, let's continue deeper into the sugar story, because there are layers we haven't fully explored, patterns we haven't completely traced, and modern developments that bring this ancient story right into your present-day life. The year is 1957, and in a laboratory in Illinois, something is happening that will fundamentally change the sugar story once again. A food scientist named James Schlatter is working on developing an anti-ulcer drug. He's synthesizing various compounds, testing their properties, trying to find something that will help people with stomach problems. And then he makes a mistake. He licks his finger. His eyes widen. The compound on his finger is intensely sweet. Like, really sweet. Sweeter than sugar. Way sweeter than sugar. About 200 times sweeter, it turns out. James Schlatter has just accidentally discovered aspartame, which will go on to become one of the most widely used artificial sweeteners in the world, marketed under brand names like NutraSweet and Equal. This discovery opens up a whole new chapter in the sugar story, because suddenly there's an alternative. A way to get sweetness without calories, without blood sugar spikes, without the negative health effects of sugar. It seems like a miracle solution. Aspartame gets approved by the FDA in 1981 for use in tabletop sweeteners and later for use in carbonated beverages. Diet Coke launches in 1982 and becomes a massive hit. People are thrilled. You can drink soda without the calories. You can have your sweetness and health too. Sign me up. Other artificial sweeteners follow. Saccharin has actually been around since 1879, but it gets a second life as people become more health conscious. Sucralose, marketed as Splenda, comes along in 1998 with the tagline, "Made from sugar, so it tastes like sugar," which is technically true but also deeply misleading since it's a chlorinated molecule that your body can't process like sugar. The diet beverage industry explodes. The market for sugar-free products grows massively. Food companies reformulate products as light or diet versions. By the early 2000s, Americans are consuming these artificial sweeteners in huge quantities. Problem solved, right? We found a way around sugar's negative effects. We can have our cake and eat it too, literally. Except, as always with this story, it's way more complicated than that. First, there are the health concerns. Saccharin was briefly linked to bladder cancer in rats in the 1970s, though later research suggested it was safe for humans. Aspartame has been controversial since its approval, with some people reporting headaches, dizziness, and other side effects, though large-scale studies generally find it safe within normal consumption levels. But the bigger issue is more subtle and more insidious. Artificial sweeteners don't actually help people lose weight. Wait, what? How is that possible? They have 0 calories. If you replace regular soda with diet soda, you're consuming fewer calories, so you should lose weight, right? In theory, yes. In practice, no. Study after study has found that people who consume artificial sweeteners don't lose weight and may actually gain weight compared to people who don't consume them. Why? There are several theories. One is that artificial sweeteners mess with your metabolism. Your body tastes something sweet and prepares for incoming calories, releasing insulin and other hormones. But then the calories don't come, which confuses your metabolic system and may make it less efficient at processing actual sugar when you do consume it. Another theory is behavioral compensation. You drink a diet soda, you feel virtuous, so you give yourself permission to eat something else you might have avoided. I had a Diet Coke, so I can have these fries. The calories you saved on the drink get eaten elsewhere. A third theory involves the gut microbiome. Emerging research suggests that artificial sweeteners alter the bacteria in your gut in ways that can promote weight gain and metabolic problems. Your microbiome is incredibly important for digestion, immune function, even mental health, and we're just beginning to understand how artificial sweeteners affect it. And there's a fourth, more fundamental problem. Artificial sweeteners maintain your taste preference for extreme sweetness. If you're drinking diet soda that's been formulated to taste super sweet, your palate doesn't adjust. You continue to crave that level of sweetness in other foods. You're not breaking the addiction, you're just feeding it with a 0-calorie substitute. It's like methadone for sugar addiction, except it doesn't even work as well as methadone does for opioid addiction. So the promise of artificial sweeteners, that you could have sweetness without consequences, turned out to be largely false. Some people can use them successfully as part of a weight loss strategy, sure. But for the population as a whole, they haven't solved the obesity or diabetes epidemics. They may have even made things worse by giving people a false sense of security. The food industry, of course, loves artificial sweeteners because they're cheaper than sugar. They allow products to be marketed as diet or healthy, and they keep people consuming sweet products. It's a win-win for them, even if it's not actually helping consumers. And this brings us to a more recent development, the natural sweetener movement. In the 2010s, people start becoming wary of artificial sweeteners. They want natural alternatives. The industry responds with stevia, derived from the stevia plant. Monk fruit extract. Erythritol, a sugar alcohol that occurs naturally in some fruits. Allulose, a rare sugar that tastes like table sugar but isn't absorbed by the body. These sweeteners have advantages. Stevia and monk fruit are actually derived from plants, so they can legitimately be called natural. They don't spike blood sugar. They have 0 or very few calories. And they don't seem to have the same metabolic effects as artificial sweeteners, though research is still ongoing. Erythritol is particularly interesting because it tastes almost exactly like sugar, has 0 calories, and doesn't affect blood sugar. It's become incredibly popular, especially in the keto and low-carb communities. But, and you knew there was going to be a but, there are potential issues with these too. A 2023 study linked erythritol to increased risk of heart attack and stroke, though other researchers have questioned the methodology. Some people experience digestive issues from sugar alcohols. And again, these sweeteners maintain the expectation of sweetness rather than helping people adjust their palates. Plus, natural doesn't automatically mean healthy. Arsenic is natural. Poison ivy is natural. Natural is a marketing term more than a meaningful descriptor of health effects. The fundamental problem remains, we're still trying to have our cake and eat it too. We want the pleasure of sweetness without any of the consequences. We want a magic bullet that lets us keep consuming sweet foods and drinks without gaining weight, developing diabetes, or harming our health. But what if that's not possible? What if the solution isn't finding the perfect substitute for sugar, but actually changing our relationship with sweetness? That's a harder sell, obviously. It requires real change, real sacrifice, real effort. It's not something you can buy in a package with a clever marketing slogan. But it might be the only thing that actually works. Let me take you somewhere else now, somewhere that perfectly illustrates the modern sugar dilemma, a supermarket in suburban America, any city, any day. Walk down the cereal aisle and really look at what's being sold. Brightly colored boxes with cartoon characters, promises of vitamins and whole grains, and sugar content that would have seemed insane to anyone from a century ago. Some children's cereals are more than 40% sugar by weight. That's not food, that's candy masquerading as breakfast. Move to the yogurt aisle. Yogurt seems healthy, right? It's got probiotics and protein and calcium. Except most flavored yogurts have as much sugar as ice cream. The fruit on the bottom? It's swimming in syrup. Even low-fat yogurts often have extra sugar added to compensate for the missing fat. Check out the bread aisle. Even plain sandwich bread often has sugar in it. Why? Because it makes it taste better and stay soft longer. You're literally eating sugar with your sandwich. The pasta sauce aisle is another revelation. Some brands have more sugar per serving than you'd find in a cookie. It's not there because tomato sauce needs to be sweet. It's there because sweetness is addictive and keeps you buying that brand. Then there's the beverage aisle, which is basically a liquid sugar delivery system. Regular soda, obviously. But also fruit juice, which is often as sugary as soda but marketed as healthy. Sports drinks loaded with sugar. Energy drinks that are basically liquid candy. Sweetened tea. Flavored water with sugar. Even some brands of plain bottled water have added sweeteners. And this is the environment we expect people to navigate and make healthy choices in. It's like asking someone to stay sober while living in a bar. The food industry has systematically made avoiding sugar almost impossible unless you're cooking everything from scratch using basic ingredients. And even then, you have to be careful, because sugar is added to things you wouldn't expect: deli meat, salad dressing, pickles, crackers, mustard, mayonnaise, peanut butter. It's overwhelming. And it's intentional. Because the more sugar you eat, the more sugar you crave, the more you buy. It's a beautiful system if you're a food company executive. It's a nightmare if you're trying to be healthy. But let's zoom out even further and look at how sugar intersects with other major social issues, because this story is never just about one thing. Take poverty, for instance. In wealthy countries, there's a strong correlation between poverty and sugar consumption. Poor people consume more sugary foods and drinks than wealthy people. Why? It's not because poor people are less informed or make worse decisions. It's because sugar is cheap calories, and when you're on a tight budget, cheap calories are attractive. A 2-liter bottle of soda costs less than a gallon of milk. A package of cookies costs less than fresh fruit. Fast food loaded with sugar is cheaper and more convenient than cooking healthy meals from scratch, especially if you're working multiple jobs and don't have time to cook. Plus, if your life is stressful, which poverty definitely is, sugar provides a reliable hit of pleasure. It's self-medication, a way to cope with chronic stress and unhappiness. This creates a vicious cycle. Poverty leads to sugar consumption, which leads to obesity and diabetes, which leads to medical expenses and lost work productivity, which reinforces poverty. Meanwhile, wealthy people can afford organic produce, have time to cook healthy meals, can pay for gym memberships and personal trainers, and have lower stress levels that make it easier to resist cravings. The result? In modern America and many other developed countries, obesity and diabetes are diseases of poverty. That's a complete reversal from most of human history, when only the wealthy could afford enough food to get fat. This creates a moral dimension to the sugar story that's often overlooked. When we talk about sugar consumption as a personal choice, we're ignoring the reality that choices are constrained by circumstances. The food industry specifically targets poor communities with advertising for sugary products. Corner stores in poor neighborhoods stock more junk food and less fresh produce than stores in wealthy neighborhoods. Fast food restaurants cluster in poor areas. It's structural. It's systematic. And it means that any solution to the sugar problem has to address inequality and poverty, not just individual behavior. Then there's the racial dimension. In the United States, Black and Latino communities have higher rates of obesity and diabetes than white communities, even when controlling for income. Part of this is the legacy of slavery and segregation, which created patterns of neighborhood inequality that persist today. Part of it is that the food industry specifically targets minority communities with advertising for unhealthy products. And there's a historical irony here that's almost too dark to contemplate. The descendants of people who were enslaved to produce sugar are now being disproportionately harmed by sugar consumption, in a food system that targets them specifically, while being blamed for making poor choices. The sugar story is never just about sugar. It's about power, about who controls food systems, about who profits and who suffers, about how historical injustices create present-day inequalities. And it's global. In developing countries, multinational food and beverage companies are aggressively marketing sugary products to populations that historically had low sugar consumption. Mexico now has higher obesity rates than the United States, partly due to Coca-Cola's massive presence there. Pacific Island nations have skyrocketing diabetes rates as traditional diets are replaced with imported processed foods. The World Health Organization has called this a pandemic, and they're not exaggerating. Type 2 diabetes is expected to affect 700 million people globally by 2045. That's nearly 10% of the world's population with a largely preventable disease driven primarily by sugar consumption. The economic costs are staggering. Healthcare expenses for diabetes and obesity-related conditions run into the hundreds of billions of dollars annually in the United States alone. Globally, we're talking trillions. And that's not counting lost productivity, premature deaths, reduced quality of life. But here's what really gets me: we know how to solve this problem. It's not complicated. Reduce sugar consumption, particularly of sugary beverages. Increase consumption of whole foods, fruits and vegetables, foods that humans actually evolved to eat. Move more, sleep enough, manage stress. The science is clear. The solution is simple. But the implementation is incredibly difficult because it requires confronting powerful economic interests that profit from the status quo. This brings us to one of the most important battles currently being fought in the sugar wars, the fight over sugary beverage taxes. Mexico implemented a national soda tax in 2014. Berkeley, California was the first U.S. city to pass one in 2015. Since then, dozens of cities and several countries have followed suit. The taxes are usually around 1 to 2 cents per ounce, which adds up to about 30 to 50 cents on a 2-liter bottle of soda. The evidence suggests these taxes work. In Mexico, soda consumption dropped by about 10% in the first 2 years after the tax was implemented, with larger decreases among lower-income households. In Berkeley, consumption dropped by about 20%. But the beverage industry fights these taxes with everything they've got. They fund opposition campaigns, lobby politicians, file lawsuits, run ads claiming the taxes are regressive and hurt poor people. They argue that governments shouldn't be in the business of telling people what to drink. Some of these arguments have merit. Soda taxes are regressive in the sense that they take a larger percentage of income from poor people than rich people. But this ignores the fact that poor people also bear the largest burden of sugar-related diseases, so reducing their consumption has the largest health benefit for them. And the personal freedom argument is rich, coming from an industry that spends billions on advertising designed to manipulate behavior, that targets children who can't make informed choices, that has systematically hidden the health risks of their products, and that has engineered their beverages to be as addictive as possible. The real issue isn't freedom. It's profit. A successful soda tax reduces consumption, which reduces revenue, which threatens the beverage industry's business model. But public health advocates are undeterred. The evidence is on their side. More cities and countries are implementing these taxes. The momentum is building. And this is where individual actions and systemic change intersect. Every person who decides to drink less soda makes a small dent in the industry's profits and a small improvement in their own health. But when millions of people make that choice, and when governments create policies that encourage and support that choice, real change becomes possible. It's not either/or. It's both/and. We need individual responsibility and systemic change, personal choices and public policy, consumer awareness and corporate accountability. Now let me tell you about something fascinating that's happening right now in the scientific community. Researchers are trying to understand sugar addiction at a molecular level, and what they're discovering is pretty wild. It turns out that sugar doesn't just trigger dopamine release in your brain's reward centers. It actually changes gene expression in neurons, modifying how your brain functions. Chronic sugar consumption can alter the structure and function of the hippocampus, which is involved in memory and learning. It affects the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and impulse control. In other words, eating a lot of sugar literally changes your brain in ways that make it harder to stop eating sugar. It's a perfect feedback loop for addiction. Even more interesting, some researchers are finding that sugar consumption can affect epigenetics, meaning the changes might be passed down to your children. If you consume a lot of sugar, your kids might be more prone to obesity and metabolic problems, not just because of the environment you create for them, but because of biological changes that affect how their genes are expressed. This is still emerging science, and there's a lot we don't understand. But it suggests that the sugar epidemic isn't just affecting the current generation. It's potentially affecting generations to come. That should scare you. It scares me. Because it means the consequences of our current sugar consumption might echo through time in ways we can't fully predict. But it also means that if we change course now, if we reduce sugar consumption and help our bodies heal, we might be able to prevent some of those consequences for future generations. The human body is remarkably resilient. Stop eating sugar, and your taste buds adjust within a few weeks. Your insulin sensitivity improves. Your liver begins to heal from fatty deposits. Your brain starts to function better. You lose weight, your energy stabilizes, your mood improves. It's not permanent damage, at least not if you catch it early enough. The body wants to be healthy. It wants to heal. You just have to give it the chance. This is the hope in the story, the light in the darkness. For all the harm that sugar has caused, for all the suffering and exploitation and death, it's not too late to change course. Individuals can make different choices. Communities can support each other in eating healthier. Governments can implement policies that promote public health over corporate profits. Food companies can reformulate products and shift toward healthier offerings. It's all possible. It's all within reach. The question is whether we have the will to do it. Let me bring you to one more place, one more moment in time that illustrates where we are in the sugar story right now. It's 2024, and you're in a high school cafeteria in a diverse urban area. Look around at what the kids are eating and drinking. Some have brought lunch from home, maybe a sandwich and some fruit, or leftovers from dinner. But most are buying lunch at school. The school has tried to make improvements. The pizza has whole wheat crust now. The chicken nuggets are supposedly baked instead of fried. There's a salad bar, though not many kids are using it. But look closer. The fruit cocktail is packed in syrup. The healthy granola bar has more sugar than a candy bar. The chocolate milk, which most kids are drinking, has as much sugar as a Coke. The ketchup on the fries has sugar. The sports drink in the vending machine has sugar. These kids are consuming massive amounts of sugar without even realizing it. And they're doing it in an institution that's supposed to be educating them and promoting their health. Some of them are already pre-diabetic. Some are obese. Some will develop type 2 diabetes before they graduate high school. Their life expectancy is lower than their parents' generation, and sugar is a major reason why. But here's the thing that gives me hope: these kids are also more aware than previous generations. They've grown up with smartphones and internet access. They can research nutrition. They can watch documentaries about food. They can connect with health-conscious communities online. Some of them are making different choices. Some are questioning why their school is feeding them junk. Some are pushing for change. And that's the generation that's going to inherit this problem, but it's also the generation that might finally solve it. Because they don't have the same baggage as older generations. They don't remember when soda was a special treat and not a daily beverage. They can see the current system more clearly because they didn't watch it gradually evolve. If there's going to be a real revolution in how we relate to sugar, it'll probably come from young people who decide they're not going to accept the system that's been handed to them. And maybe, just maybe, we'll look back from 2050 or 2075 and see the 2020s as the turning point, the moment when humanity finally started to break free from sugar's grip. That's the story I'd like to tell. That's the history I'd like to see written. But it depends on choices that haven't been made yet, on actions that haven't been taken, on courage that hasn't been summoned. It depends, in some small way, on you. Now, I want to take you even deeper into a dimension of this story that often gets overlooked: the psychology of taste and how sugar has fundamentally rewired human preferences across generations. Think about your grandparents or great-grandparents. If you'd given them a modern energy drink or a super sweet dessert from a chain restaurant, there's a good chance they'd find it almost unbearably sweet. Their palates were calibrated to a different baseline, one with less sugar, where sweetness was more rare and therefore more noticeable. But people who've grown up in the modern food environment barely register the sweetness levels that would have shocked previous generations. Your taste buds literally adapt to what you regularly consume. If you eat very sweet foods all the time, moderately sweet foods start to taste bland. Natural sweetness, like that of a strawberry or a carrot, barely registers as sweet at all. This is why people who successfully reduce their sugar intake often report that after a few weeks, foods they used to enjoy taste way too sweet. Their palates have recalibrated. A can of Coke tastes like syrup. A grocery store muffin tastes like eating pure sugar. Even fruits taste sweeter than they remembered. The industry knows this, which is why they keep increasing sweetness levels in products. It's an arms race. As people's palates adapt to high sweetness, you need even more sweetness to create the same impact, to achieve that bliss point that maximizes consumption. It's like tolerance to any drug. The dose that once got you high doesn't work anymore, so you need more. Except with sugar, the dealer is every grocery store, restaurant, and vending machine, and the product is legal, cheap, and socially acceptable. This has created a situation where multiple generations have now grown up with drastically altered taste preferences. Children born in the 1990s, 2000s, 2010s have never known a food environment that wasn't saturated with sugar. Their baseline is completely different from their great-grandparents who were born in the 1920s or 1930s. And this matters because it makes change harder. If you've never tasted food any other way, if sweetness is what food is supposed to taste like, then reducing sugar feels like deprivation rather than returning to normal. Imagine if I told you that you had to start eating food that tasted bland and boring for health reasons. You'd resist, right? That's what sugar reduction feels like to people whose palates have been shaped by the modern food environment. They're not being stubborn or weak-willed. They're responding to genuine taste preferences that have been systematically cultivated by the food industry. Breaking this cycle requires not just willpower, but actual physiological change. Your taste buds need to regenerate, which they do every couple of weeks. Your brain's reward pathways need to recalibrate, which takes longer. Your gut microbiome needs to shift, which can take months. It's a process, and it's uncomfortable, and food companies have zero incentive to help you through it. In fact, they have every incentive to prevent you from starting it, because once you recalibrate your palate, most of their products will taste terrible to you. That's a threat to their business model, so they fight it with reformulations that gradually increase sweetness levels, with new products that push the boundaries even further, with marketing that frames very sweet foods as normal and desirable. But there's a growing counter-movement. Chefs and food writers advocating for less sugar in cooking. Restaurants that focus on letting natural flavors shine. Food companies, usually smaller ones, producing products with reduced sugar that still taste good because they use quality ingredients and sophisticated flavoring techniques instead of just dumping in sweetness. It's a niche right now, but it's growing. There's a market for people who want to eat well without consuming massive amounts of sugar, and entrepreneurs are starting to serve that market. This is capitalism, finally, maybe, working in favor of health instead of against it. When enough consumers demand something different, businesses emerge to provide it. But we're still in the early stages. The sugar-saturated food system is still dominant. The default is still sweet. You still have to work hard, read labels constantly, and seek out alternatives if you want to avoid sugar. The revolution hasn't happened yet. But the conditions for revolution are developing. You know what's really interesting? The parallels between the sugar story and the climate story. In both cases, we have a substance that seemed innocent or even beneficial initially. In both cases, a massive global industry developed around it. In both cases, the industry funded disinformation when evidence of harm emerged. In both cases, individual behavior change is necessary but not sufficient. In both cases, systemic change requires confronting powerful economic interests. And in both cases, there's this fundamental question: can humanity collectively overcome short-term pleasure or profit for long-term well-being? With sugar, the pleasure is literal, immediate, and individual. That sweetness on your tongue right now. The dopamine hit in your brain. The temporary mood boost. The consequences are delayed, diffuse, and statistical. You won't get diabetes from one can of Coke. You won't have a heart attack from one cookie. The harm accumulates slowly, invisibly, until suddenly it's a crisis. That's a really hard pattern for humans to deal with because we're wired for immediate cause and effect. Touch fire, get burned, don't touch fire again. Simple. But consume sugar regularly for years and then develop diabetes? The connection is real but abstract. It's easy to rationalize, easy to deny, easy to think, it won't happen to me. The food industry exploits this psychological weakness ruthlessly. They emphasize the immediate pleasure and downplay or deny the long-term consequences. They create doubt about the science. They shift blame to individual choices rather than the food environment they've created. It's the same playbook as climate change denialism, and it works for the same reasons. Humans are bad at dealing with slow-moving crises, especially when there are powerful interests telling them everything is fine. But we're reaching a point where the consequences are getting harder to ignore. Just like extreme weather events are making climate change undeniable, the obesity and diabetes epidemics are making sugar's harms undeniable. 1 in 3 American adults now has prediabetes. More than 40% of American adults are obese. These aren't abstract statistics. This is looking around at your family, your friends, your coworkers, and seeing that almost half are significantly overweight, that many are dealing with chronic health issues, that life expectancy is dropping for the first time in generations. It's visible. It's personal. It's undeniable. And that's creating pressure for change in ways that abstract health warnings never could. Let me tell you about someone who illustrates this perfectly, though I'm going to keep details vague to protect privacy. A man in his 40s, working class, overweight most of his adult life. He drank soda every day, multiple cans. Ate fast food regularly. Never thought much about it because that's just how everyone he knew lived. Then he got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. His doctor put him on medication, told him to change his diet. He tried, half-heartedly, but it was hard. Food without sweetness didn't taste right. He felt deprived, cranky. Then his daughter, age 12, got diagnosed with prediabetes. Suddenly it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his kid, who was dealing with a metabolic disorder before hitting puberty because of the food environment he'd helped create in their home. That's what motivated real change. He cut out soda completely. Started cooking at home more. Read labels obsessively. Lost weight, got his blood sugar under control, eventually got off the diabetes medication. His daughter's prediabetes reversed. It's a success story, yeah. But it shouldn't have taken his child developing a metabolic disorder to create motivation for change. That's what I mean about the crisis becoming undeniable. People are changing not because of public health messages but because they're personally experiencing the consequences, or watching their loved ones experience them. And when enough people have those personal experiences, that creates momentum for systemic change. Because suddenly it's not some abstract public health issue. It's, my kid has diabetes, what are we going to do about it? That's powerful. That's the kind of thing that overcomes industry lobbying and political inertia. We're seeing it play out now in real time. The soda tax movement is gaining ground. School nutrition standards are slowly improving, despite industry resistance. Food labeling is getting more transparent. More doctors are talking to patients about sugar. It's not enough yet. It's not happening fast enough. But it's happening. And the story isn't over. Before we go further, let me remind you one more time, if you're finding value in this deep historical exploration, if these connections and patterns are enriching your understanding, please subscribe to Dreamless Timelines. We exist to bring you these thoughtfully crafted, extensively researched historical narratives that educate even as they help you relax into sleep. Give us a like, drop a comment with your suggestions for future topics, and help us build a community of people who love diving deep into history's most fascinating stories. Now, let's shift to something you might not expect in a history of sugar, the role of advertising and how it's shaped not just what we eat, but how we think about food, happiness, and the good life. The modern advertising industry essentially grew up alongside the sugar industry, and their relationship has been symbiotic and deeply influential. In the early 1900s, as sugar became cheaper and more available, companies needed to convince people to buy their specific brand. Enter advertising. Coca-Cola was one of the pioneers. Their advertising campaigns didn't just sell a beverage, they sold a lifestyle, a feeling, an American identity. Those iconic images of Santa Claus. Coca-Cola created that version of Santa in the 1930s for their advertising campaigns. The modern image of Christmas, with its emphasis on consumption and treats, was literally shaped by a sugar company's marketing department. Think about that. A corporation, selling a product that would eventually contribute to a global health crisis, helped define how millions of people celebrate the most important holiday in Christian culture. That's cultural power on an almost unimaginable scale. And it wasn't just Coca-Cola. Every major sugar-based product brand invested heavily in advertising. They sponsored radio shows, TV programs, sports events. They created mascots that children would love, Tony the Tiger, Trix Rabbit, the Kool-Aid Man. They developed jingles that would stick in your head for decades. This wasn't accidental. Advertising agencies studied psychology, understanding how to create emotional associations, how to bypass rational thinking and speak directly to desire and identity. They figured out that if you could make a product part of someone's sense of self, you'd create loyalty that went way beyond taste preferences. You're not just drinking Coke, you're part of the Coke generation. You're not just eating M&Ms, you're participating in a fun, colorful, playful lifestyle. You're not just giving your kid sugary cereal, you're being a good parent who makes mornings fun and easy. The messages were everywhere, constant, sophisticated. And they worked. They worked so well that now, multiple generations later, people have deeply emotional relationships with brand-name sugar products. Nostalgic memories tied to specific cereals or candies. Traditions built around certain foods or drinks. Identity connections to brands that feel almost tribal. You know how some people will fight you about whether Coke or Pepsi is better, with genuine passion. That's successful advertising. You've gotten people to incorporate a corporate product into their sense of self, to the point where criticizing the product feels like a personal attack. This is incredibly valuable to companies because it creates resistance to health messages. If someone tells you that Coca-Cola is bad for you, and you've spent your whole life associating Coke with happiness, family gatherings, summer barbecues, good times, you're not going to want to believe them. The cognitive dissonance is too uncomfortable. So you rationalize. Everything in moderation. Life is short, enjoy it. My grandpa drank Coke every day and lived to be 90. You find reasons to dismiss the evidence because accepting it would require changing not just your behavior but your identity and your memories. The advertising industry understands this deeply, which is why they don't just advertise products, they advertise feelings, memories, aspirations, identities. They're not selling sugar water, they're selling happiness, belonging, the American dream, childhood joy, refreshment, energy, celebration. And children are particularly vulnerable to this because their identities are still forming. A 6-year-old who watches cartoons sponsored by sugary cereal brands, who sees his favorite characters eating those products, who gets toys with his Happy Meal, is being shaped in ways he doesn't have the cognitive development to resist. This is why advertising to children is so controversial, and why some countries restrict it. Sweden, Norway, and Quebec ban TV advertising aimed at children under 12. Other countries restrict advertising of unhealthy foods to children. But in the United States, it's basically a free-for-all. Food companies spend billions marketing to children, and it works. Kids as young as 2 can recognize brand logos. Children influence household purchases. Brands create lifelong customers by hooking them young. And here's where it gets really dark. The industry specifically targets low-income and minority communities with advertising for unhealthy products. Research has consistently shown that there are more ads for sugary drinks, fast food, and junk food in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods compared to white neighborhoods. TV shows popular with Black audiences have more ads for unhealthy foods than shows popular with white audiences. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented marketing strategy. The industry has identified these communities as high-value markets, places where they can sell more product with targeted advertising. So you've got communities that already face higher rates of food insecurity, lower access to fresh healthy food, higher stress levels, and fewer resources for healthcare, and the industry is deliberately bombarding them with advertising for products that will make their health worse. It's systemic harm, and it's intentional, and it's legal. The defenders will say that advertising is just providing information, that adults make their own choices, that companies have a right to market legal products. But that ignores the reality of how advertising works psychologically, how it targets vulnerable populations, how it shapes culture and preferences in ways that individuals can't fully control. When Coca-Cola spends $4 billion a year on advertising, when McDonald's spends $2 billion, when countless other companies are spending billions more, that's not just information. That's cultural engineering on a massive scale. And the impacts are measurable. Countries with more advertising of unhealthy foods have higher obesity rates. Children who watch more TV see more food ads and consume more junk food. Neighborhoods with more outdoor advertising for unhealthy products have higher rates of obesity and diabetes. The evidence is clear. Advertising works. It changes behavior. And the sugar industry has used it masterfully to create and maintain demand for products that are harming public health. But there are cracks appearing in this system too. Social media has created space for counternarratives, for health influencers and nutritionists and doctors to reach large audiences without having to go through traditional media gatekeepers. Documentaries on streaming platforms can educate people about food industry practices without being subject to advertising pressure. Young people in particular are more skeptical of advertising than previous generations. They've grown up saturated with marketing messages and have developed better filters. They're more likely to research products, to read labels, to question corporate claims. This generational shift is subtle but significant. The advertising techniques that worked brilliantly on baby boomers and Gen X are less effective on millennials and Gen Z. The industry is having to adapt, to find new ways to reach consumers who are more cynical and better informed. This is creating opportunity for change, for new food companies that can market themselves as authentic alternatives to big food, for health-conscious brands that can build trust through transparency rather than traditional advertising. The advertising landscape is shifting, and that's shifting the sugar story too. Now let's talk about something that ties together several threads we've explored, the role of government in the sugar story, and how policy has both enabled and occasionally resisted the sugar industry's dominance. Governments have been involved in the sugar trade since the beginning. Remember those Spanish conquistadors claiming Caribbean islands for sugarcane production? That was government policy. The British Empire's protection of sugar trade routes? Government policy. The massive subsidies for sugar production that exist in the United States, Europe, and many other countries today? Government policy. In the United States, sugar policy is a perfect example of how industry influence shapes government in ways that benefit corporations over consumers. The U.S. sugar program, established in the 1930s and refined over decades, uses a combination of price supports, import quotas, and tariffs to keep domestic sugar prices artificially high. This makes American sugar producers very profitable. It makes American consumers pay significantly more for sugar than they would in a free market. It makes candy manufacturers move production to other countries where sugar is cheaper. And it generates billions in campaign contributions and lobbying expenditures from the sugar industry to maintain the system. The sugar lobby is one of the most powerful in Washington. Companies like Fangel Corp., which operates under brands like Domino Sugar, spend millions on lobbying and contributions to both Democrats and Republicans. The industry has successfully defended its subsidies for decades, despite economists from across the political spectrum agreeing that they're wasteful and harmful. But here's the weird thing: by keeping sugar prices high, the U.S. sugar program may have accidentally provided some public health benefit. Higher prices mean slightly lower consumption. And the high price of sugar created an economic incentive for the development of high-fructose corn syrup as a cheaper alternative. Now, high-fructose corn syrup has its own problems, which we discussed earlier. But the point is that government policy, even when it's not intended to address health, can have health impacts. This raises an interesting question: should government actively use policy to reduce sugar consumption for public health reasons? This is where things get politically contentious, because it touches on fundamental questions about the role of government, individual freedom, and public health. On one side, you've got public health advocates who argue that government has a responsibility to protect citizens from harmful products, especially when those products are marketed deceptively and disproportionately harm vulnerable populations. They point to tobacco regulation as a successful model. They advocate for sugar taxes, marketing restrictions, clearer labeling, limits on portion sizes, removal of sugary drinks from schools and government buildings. On the other side, you've got libertarian-minded folks who argue that government shouldn't be telling people what to eat or drink, that this is personal freedom territory, that education is fine but regulation is overreach. They worry about the slippery slope, about government becoming a nanny state that micromanages every aspect of life. And then you've got the industry, which funds both genuine libertarians and front groups masquerading as grassroots organizations to fight any and all regulation. The industry has learned from tobacco that even weak regulations can be devastating to profits, so they fight everything, even modest proposals that most people would consider reasonable. The result is policy gridlock in most places. Some cities and countries have implemented sugar taxes or other interventions, but many places have done nothing, even as the health crisis worsens. And the human cost is enormous. We're talking about preventable suffering on a massive scale. Children developing type 2 diabetes. Adults having heart attacks and strokes. Families bankrupted by medical expenses. Lives cut short. All of this is preventable. We know how to prevent it. But we're not doing it, largely because of political dysfunction driven by industry influence. It's frustrating, and it's tragic, and it feels almost insurmountable sometimes. But change is possible. Tobacco regulations seemed impossible until they weren't. Marriage equality seemed impossible until it wasn't. Cultural attitudes and political realities can shift faster than we expect. The sugar industry seems invincible now, but so did the tobacco industry in 1960. By 2000, tobacco companies were pariahs, their products were heavily taxed and restricted, and smoking rates had plummeted. The same transformation is possible for sugar. It requires sustained advocacy, political courage, cultural change, and consumer pressure. It's not easy, but it's doable. And it's already beginning. The soda tax victories, the growing awareness of sugar's harms, the increasing demand for healthier options, the next generation skepticism of big food, these are all signs of a system in transition. The question is how long the transition takes and how many people suffer in the meantime. Let me take you somewhere completely different now, to explore an angle of the sugar story that's often overlooked, the environmental justice dimension. Sugar production has always been ecologically destructive, but the impacts fall disproportionately on poor communities and communities of color, both historically and today. Think about those Caribbean plantations we discussed earlier. The land wasn't just stolen through colonialism, it was transformed. Diverse forests were cleared for sugarcane monoculture. Soil was depleted through intensive farming. Water sources were diverted and polluted. Native plants and animals were displaced or driven extinct. This environmental destruction was inseparable from the human suffering. Enslaved people worked degraded land, breathed smoke from burning cane fields, drank polluted water. The same system that exploited their labor destroyed the environment they lived in. And this pattern continues today. In Brazil, sugarcane expansion has driven deforestation, particularly in the Atlantic forest and Cerrado regions. Indigenous communities have been displaced. Water tables have been depleted. Pesticide runoff has poisoned rivers. The people who benefit from this, the plantation owners and company executives, don't live in these areas. They live in cities, in wealthy neighborhoods, far from the environmental destruction their businesses create. The people who suffer are poor rural communities, often black or indigenous, who have to live with polluted water, depleted soil, and destroyed ecosystems. In Florida, which is the largest sugar-producing state in the U.S., sugarcane cultivation has been a major contributor to the degradation of the Everglades. Nutrient pollution from sugar farms feeds algae blooms that kill fish and create toxic conditions. This affects poor communities in South Florida disproportionately, particularly communities of color who can't afford to move away. The sugar companies, meanwhile, are politically powerful enough to resist environmental regulations that would force them to clean up their practices. In India, sugarcane cultivation uses enormous amounts of water, contributing to water scarcity in regions that are already drought-prone. Poor farmers who don't grow sugarcane struggle to get water for their crops because sugarcane cultivation has depleted aquifers. This is environmental injustice, the pattern where environmental harms are concentrated in communities with the least political power to resist them. And it connects to the health justice issues we discussed earlier. The same communities that are targeted with advertising for sugary products, that have less access to healthy food, that suffer higher rates of diabetes and obesity, are also often the communities living with the environmental destruction caused by sugar production. It's compounded injustice, multiple systems of oppression and exploitation reinforcing each other. And it traces directly back to the plantation system and slavery. The logic that says it's okay to destroy land and exploit people for profit, as long as those people are poor or black or brown or indigenous, is the same logic that justified slavery. It's evolved, it's wearing different clothes, but it's fundamentally the same. This is why I keep saying the sugar story is never just about sugar. It's about power, about who matters and who doesn't, about who profits and who suffers. And until we confront these deeper patterns, these structural injustices, we can't fully solve the sugar problem. Because the problem isn't really sugar. The problem is a system that values profit over people, that concentrates benefits and disperses harms, that treats some human beings as expendable. Sugar is just one manifestation of that system, one thread in a larger pattern. But it's a thread we can pull on. Because sugar is tangible, it's personal, it's something everyone interacts with. And by understanding sugar's story, by seeing the connections between consumption and production, between pleasure and suffering, between individual choices and systemic injustice, we can start to see the larger pattern. And maybe, just maybe, we can start to change it. Now, let me tell you about something that represents hope in this story, something that shows how individuals and communities can resist even powerful systems, the slow food movement and its relationship to sugar. The slow food movement started in Italy in 1986 as a protest against the opening of a McDonald's near the Spanish Steps in Rome. The founder, Carlo Petrini, argued that fast food represented not just unhealthy eating, but a whole philosophy of life that valued speed over quality, convenience over connection, profit over tradition. Slow food advocated for the opposite, taking time to prepare and enjoy food, valuing traditional recipes and local ingredients, eating seasonally, supporting small producers, understanding where your food comes from. This might not seem directly related to sugar, but it actually is, deeply. Because slow food's philosophy fundamentally opposes the industrialized food system that sugar exemplifies. When you cook from scratch using traditional recipes and local ingredients, you're not using processed foods loaded with added sugar. When you eat seasonally, you're appreciating the natural sweetness of fruits at their peak rather than expecting intense sweetness year-round. The movement has spread globally, with chapters in dozens of countries. It's influenced how many people think about food, how chefs approach cooking, how consumers make purchasing decisions. And it represents a different vision of what food can be, not just fuel, not just a delivery system for sugar and other cheap ingredients, but something cultural, social, pleasurable in deeper ways than just a quick dopamine hit. This philosophy has practical implications. People who embrace slow food principles tend to consume much less sugar, not because they're following a diet or restricting themselves, but because their entire relationship with food is different. They're finding pleasure in complexity, in subtle flavors, in the social experience of cooking and eating together. It's a model for how we might rebuild a healthier relationship with sweetness and food in general. Not through deprivation or willpower, but through rediscovering older, richer ways of relating to food. And it's not just an elite thing, though it's often portrayed that way. Yes, some slow food enthusiasts are wealthy foodies who can afford expensive ingredients and have time for elaborate cooking. But the core principles, valuing real food over processed food, cooking at home, eating together, appreciating quality over quantity, these are accessible to anyone. In fact, these principles used to be normal for most people. Your great-grandparents probably cooked from scratch because they had to, ate seasonally because that's what was available, and didn't consume much sugar because it wasn't in everything. The industrial food system trained us out of these practices, convinced us that convenience was more important than quality, that fast and cheap were virtues rather than compromises. The slow food movement is about reclaiming those older values, not out of nostalgia, but because they actually work better for human health and happiness. And this connects to another movement that's gaining traction, food sovereignty. This is the idea that communities should have control over their own food systems, including what's grown, how it's produced, and who benefits from it. Food sovereignty challenges the industrial agriculture model where a few large corporations control food production and dictate what people eat. It emphasizes local food systems, sustainable agriculture, indigenous knowledge, and democratic control. In the context of sugar, food sovereignty means communities resisting the sugar industry's dominance, whether that's indigenous communities in Brazil protecting their land from sugarcane expansion, or urban communities in the US demanding better food options than liquor stores selling junk food. These movements are small compared to the industrial food system, but they're growing. They represent alternative visions of how we could organize food production and consumption, visions that don't center sugar and don't accept exploitation as inevitable. And importantly, they're building practical alternatives, not just criticizing the current system. Community gardens, farmers markets, food co-ops, local agriculture initiatives, these are all creating infrastructure for a different food system. It's slow work, building alternatives while the dominant system has overwhelming advantages in capital, political influence, and cultural momentum. But it's happening, and it's creating spaces where people can experience a different relationship with food. These spaces are proof that another way is possible, that we're not locked into the sugar-saturated, health-destroying, environmentally devastating system we currently have. Change is possible. It's being built right now, in community gardens and home kitchens and farmers markets and local food co-ops, by people who've decided they want something different and are willing to create it themselves. That's the revolutionary potential in the sugar story, the possibility that people can collectively reject what's being sold to them and build something better. It's not easy, and it's not guaranteed to succeed, but it's happening. And every person who participates, who chooses to cook from scratch or support local producers or reduce their sugar consumption or advocate for better food policy, is part of that change. You're part of the story. Right now, listening to this, thinking about these connections, you're engaging with the sugar story in a way that could lead to action. And that's how change happens, not all at once, but person by person, choice by choice, building momentum until suddenly the impossible becomes inevitable. Let me take you back one more time to the very beginning, to that woman in New Guinea chewing sugarcane, but now with everything we've learned. She's experiencing something genuinely pleasurable, genuinely valuable. Sweetness is good. The desire for it is natural and healthy. The problem isn't sugar itself, it's what we've done with it. We've taken something that should be occasional and made it constant. We've taken something that should be mild and made it intense. We've taken something that should be part of a varied diet and made it the center of our food system. We've industrialized pleasure, commercialized it, weaponized it against our own health. But we can undo this. We can return to a relationship with sweetness that's actually healthy, that honors the pleasure without creating the harm. This doesn't mean going back to chewing sugarcane stalks. We're not going to uninvent sugar refining or dismantle the global food system overnight. But we can move toward moderation, toward greater awareness, toward food systems that prioritize health over profit. We can reclaim sweetness from the industry that's monopolized it. We can make it special again, occasional, genuinely pleasurable rather than compulsive and harmful. This is the path forward, not backward to some imagined past, but forward to a future where we've learned from our mistakes, where we've integrated traditional wisdom with modern knowledge, where we've built food systems that serve human flourishing rather than corporate profit. It's an optimistic vision, maybe even idealistic. But idealism that drives action is better than cynicism that leads to paralysis. The sugar story isn't over. This chapter, the one we're living through right now, is still being written. The ending hasn't been determined. And you get to influence it. Not by yourself, obviously. You're one person making individual choices. But those choices ripple outward. They influence your family, your friends, your community. They create demand for healthier options. They support businesses trying to do things differently. And collectively, millions of individual choices create social movements, shift culture, change what's politically possible. The sugar industry seems invincible, but it's not. It's powerful because we give it power through our purchases, our acceptance, our passivity. When we withdraw that power, when we choose differently, when we demand better, the industry has to adapt or decline. And that's already starting to happen. Soda sales are declining in many wealthy countries. Sugar consumption is dropping, slowly but measurably. Companies are reformulating products. The conversation is changing. It's not enough yet, but it's something. It's the beginning of a possible transformation. And transformations take time. They're not linear. There are setbacks and resistance and moments when it feels hopeless. But looking at the long arc of the sugar story, from that first chewed stalk in New Guinea to today's global crisis, you can see that massive change is possible. The world was completely transformed by sugar once. It can be transformed again, hopefully in a healthier direction this time. That's the story. That's where we are. That's what's at stake. Now, as you drift deeper into sleep, as your conscious mind releases its grip and your subconscious takes over, let these stories settle into your deeper awareness. Think about the long chains of consequence, how a simple desire for sweetness led to slavery, empire, revolution, environmental destruction, and now a global health crisis. Think about power, about who has it and how they use it, about how systems perpetuate themselves, about how change happens anyway. Think about your own life, your own choices, your own tiny piece of this vast historical tapestry. You're not just a passive consumer. You're a historical actor, someone whose choices contribute to the direction of this ongoing story. That's both a burden and an opportunity. It means you have responsibility, yeah, but it also means you have agency. You matter. What you do ripples outward in ways you can't fully predict. Every time you choose water over soda, you're making a tiny vote against the system that wants you addicted to sugar. Every time you cook from scratch instead of buying processed food, you're building the muscles of an alternative food system. Every time you support policies that promote public health over corporate profits, you're helping shift what's politically possible. These feel like small actions, and they are. But history is made of small actions multiplied by millions of people. The sugar industry didn't become dominant overnight. It was built through millions of small decisions: farmers planting cane, merchants shipping it, refiners processing it, marketers selling it, consumers buying it, politicians protecting it. It can be dismantled the same way, through millions of small decisions flowing in a different direction. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to eliminate sugar entirely from your life tomorrow. You don't have to become an activist or a health nut or change everything at once. Just be aware. Be thoughtful. Make choices that align with your values and your health. And understand that those choices are part of something larger, part of a potential transformation that's already beginning. The complete history of sugar is also your history. It's shaped the world you live in, the food you eat, the health challenges you face, the inequalities you witness. You inherited this situation, but you're not powerless in it. You can choose how you engage with it, how you participate in the ongoing story. And maybe, just maybe, when someone tells this story in 50 years, they'll talk about the 2020s as the turning point, the moment when humanity started to break free from sugar's grip and rebuild a healthier relationship with sweetness. That would be a good story to tell. That would be a history worth making. Sleep now, with these thoughts settling into your unconscious mind. Let the story continue in your dreams, where connections form in ways your conscious mind can't quite track. And when you wake, you'll carry this knowledge with you, these stories, these patterns, these possibilities. The sugar story continues. And you're part of it. Rest easy, knowing that awareness is the first step toward change, that knowledge empowers choice, that even vast systems can be shifted by enough people deciding to push in a new direction. Sweet dreams, in the best sense of that phrase. Dreams of a world where sweetness is genuinely sweet again, where pleasure doesn't come with exploitation and suffering, where we've learned to enjoy without destroying. That world is possible. Sleep well. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the complete history of sugar. If you found this valuable, if you learned something, if you're thinking differently about that substance in your kitchen, then this was worth creating. Subscribe to Dreamless Timelines for more stories like this, long-form historical narratives that educate and fascinate even as they help you sleep. Like this video and leave a comment about what historical topic we should explore next. History is full of stories like this, stories about how we got to where we are, stories that help us understand the present and imagine different futures. We'll keep telling them as long as you keep listening. Until next time, sleep well, and make the choices that feel right for you. The story continues. Always, the story continues.